welcome back. We're going to continue thinking about the bar chart that we made last time. And in particular, we're going to think about how to format the bars associated with this bar chart. This is where we were. We're in the same notebook. We have the same data, and we've assembled a bar chart so far. But we might want to make a few changes on how the bars themselves are displayed. We're going to make other changes in future videos associated with the axes, but for right now, let's just think about the bars here. Now, a few things that we might be interested in. First, if I think about the fact that our title is making a claim that the USA and China dominated the gold medal count, that is shown here, right? We do have these two highest bars and then three other bars, but visually we're not given a clue about that. And so what we could do is imagine coloring these bars something that stands out and these bars something that does not. Because we're trying to control the appearance of the bars, we're going to go back to where we added them. We have X equals country names, Y equals gold medals. This is where we're adding the information that determines what these bars are. And it's here that we can add formatting about the bars. As I had said when we were working on pie charts, essentially in Plotly, every time that we have a representation of data, it's called a marker. And so we're going to again control the marker just as we did before. We supply this as a dictionary as we did before. And then I'm going to make this look nice for myself. What we want to do is control the colors of those bars. And so we're going to supply a list. And what we want to do is supply a list where the colors that we are providing match up with the colors with the name of the bars here. So we want sort of something that's going to stand out for these first two and then three that don't. Now, when we worked with colors in pie charts, we saw that we could supply hex values, and we took those hex values from a color generator website. There's other ways to do this in Plotly, and there are a certain set of named colors that we can provide just the names of, and they come from sort of the CSS standards. These are styling guides for the web. And so you can go to a website like the one for Mozilla, and on this website, you'll see a series of named colors. Like if I scroll down, we'll see some that we expect: black, gray, white, red, purple. There's a few other ones here as well. But if I keep scrolling, you'll see that there's just lots and lots more named colors. And each one of these colors, like here's rosy brown, is associated with a hex code. And so within Python, what we can do is supply the name of one of these colors, and it has a table that can go and look up these colors here. So for instance, maybe we want to make something that stands out that looks, well, here's red. So we can supply the name red, and then we want something that's sort of a muted gray, like silver, for instance, that would not stand out as much. And so we can go back to our code and supply those names. So again, we want to match up. So the first two match up with the names of the bars. And so the first two that we want are going to be red. These names are supplied as strings. And then we have silver, silver, and silver for the last three. Now, if I go and I go ahead and run this, you'll see that I got an error, and it's again because I had pluralized colors, and it really just needs to be color. So I'll run it again now, and here you have it. I have two red bars and a series of gray bars that don't stand out as much. So now we're beginning to tell this story. Things that we might want to control and we're not quite ready for yet is that we can make USA and China red so that they match these bars here. We're going to learn how to do this in Plotly in a later video, but for now, if you want to do that, you could always bring it into an SVG editor and take care of that. While we're considering the appearance of bars, let's think about a few other things that we could control with them. For instance, sometimes in a bar chart, you'll see the bars outlined. There's a line that goes around the marker. And this idea of how we're putting this together gives us information about how we're going to construct it. So the marker has another property called line. And what we can do is go to line. The line has a whole series of information that can be provided for it. And we'll spend a lot more time thinking about that moving forward. For now, let's just admit that this is going to be another dictionary. And so we're putting one dictionary inside of another, a concept in programming that's known as nesting. And this behavior, and it getting complicated to look at what we're seeing, is why it's important to maintain, in my opinion, this nice indentation. So I know where dictionaries start and end. The line that we want to show, we haven't seen it yet. So let's say we want a color. We know we can name things. So what if it was just a black color? Let's see what we get. Now we have this very thin line that's around each one of these. If I wanted that to be thicker, I can specify the width of the line, like maybe 5. The values that we're providing as we start to add numbers in, these are in terms of pixels. And so this entire plot has a width in pixels that we'll get to changing later on. But all these numbers that we are providing to Plotly are in terms of those pixels. So the sort of default for the axis lines is 1. That's the thin line. So if we wanted these to stand out a little bit from the axis line, we could make it something like 2. There are other things we could control about these lines, but we're not going to worry about it too much right now. We know that we can control this outline, and if you want to know more, you can read the Plotly documentation about this, which we'll be discussing later on in class as well. So there's 2 more things that I want to be able to change. One is the spacing. Now, the spacing between bars can affect its readability. In Plotly, we call this the bar gap. And even though it's a property of the markers, the place that it goes, unfortunately, is inside update layout. So here we can say bar gap, and the values allowed for bar gap run between 0 and 1. And so we'll start with 0 and see what that does. You can see now that there's no gap between the bars. And if I set the bar gap to 1, now they're just little sticks. And so what this is telling us is take the size inside of Plotly that has been set aside for each bar. How much of that region should we fill with the bar, right? So essentially between USA and China, there's a halfway point where the USA bar, where we would reasonably expect to draw it, will end. And then where the bar for China would expect to start. And then China would extend halfway between China and the ROC. And so this is telling us what fraction of that do we want to occupy the bar gap with. So how much empty space relative to that should we have? So this is saying completely empty space. This would be saying half of it should be empty space. This would be saying 2/3 of it would be empty space. Here's 1/3 of it is empty space. So if we go back to half and rerun this cell, what you can see is that at half, there's about 1 bar, and then a space for an entire bar would fit there. If I make this a little bit smaller, then maybe this is about half-ish the width of what's going on there. And then 0.25, a little bit closer together. So for me, I'd stick between this 0.25 and 0.33. I think that's a really nice range for still being able to distinguish that there's different bars, but we can also don't see them so spread out that it kind of looks silly. All right, so then we have one more thing we want to change. And for me, that is changing the direction of the bars, or the orientation of the bars, as Plotly says. So this is a vertical set of bars. Probably this is how most of you are used to seeing a bar chart, but we can also run bar charts horizontally. And there's a lot of reasons why we might do that. For one, right now these bars are kind of huge and they occupy a lot of space. And sure, we can make the plot narrow, and that would help solve it. But another issue is that the aspect ratio of this chart, which we'll talk about in a future video as well, is such that it's wider than it is long. And so where we've actually encoded the interesting quantitative information vertically is the short axis. if we have a plot like this, it's going to have this sort of aspect ratio. If we put the bars running horizontally, we'll get a lot more information out. We'll see differences more easily between these bars. The other thing that can happen is we can have long names sometimes that don't fit underneath these bars. And I'm sure you've seen bar plots where the text then is turned either slanted or vertically and it's hard to read. But if we run our bars horizontally, we don't run into this problem as much. So it's nice to know how to do that. This is a property of our markers. And so it is going to go under this add bar. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it between the Y and the marker just for readability. And what we're going to say is orientation equals H. Okay, we're also starting to get to the point where there's a lot of different things that we need to remember. And you might be asking yourself, how am I ever going to remember all the things I'm being told? Luckily, you don't really have to. And so you can see that when I hover over something like add bar, it's giving me an indication of what it is that I could put inside of it in this sort of hovery space. And that, even though we can't see everything here, it's telling you that the Marimo notebook is aware of what you can and cannot do. So where could we find that? You can go to View Live Docs. But if I go ahead and double click on something, you'll see that the documentation gets or is put over here as well that we can read about. And so when I click on add bar, it'll give me information about all the different things that I could have included inside of this. And so if I scroll down, what you'll see is that I have orientation here. And it says sets the orientation of the bars with V for vertical or H for horizontal. And that's telling us that that's what we need to put here if we would like them to run horizontally. Now I'm going to run this and it's not going to look right. And we'll talk about why that is. It looks kind of crazy. And the reason that it looks crazy is that we haven't actually provided the right information. If we have bars that run horizontally, it's now the x-axis that is the quantitative axis, and it's the y-axis that is the qualitative axis. And so we need to change which is assigned to which. The country names or categorical axes are now on the y, and the x-axis has the gold medal counts. If I run this again, now it looks pretty reasonable. However, I've got the wrong axis labeled gold medal counts. So then I can just come back to where we were updating the y-axis and say, instead, let's update the x-axis. And when I run this, now I have it properly formatted with things running horizontally. Because there's different amounts of text here on the left, now our alignment with the axis is messed up with our title. And if we want, we could go in and fix that very quick. And so let's just say, let's see what happens if I send it up to 1. That's something like that looks pretty reasonable. There we go. It's not terrible. Could be a little bit better. But yeah, that looks nice. So now we have the bars running the way we want. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to fine tune the appearance of bars even more by thinking about how they're ordered and how to control that. But for now, we've learned that we can format the bars, that we can control their color individually, that we can create outlines, and that we can control the direction that they move in. And we've learned a little bit about how to read documentation so we don't have to remember everything all the time. So I'll see you in the next video.